There is a moment every woman remembers with unsettling clarity. Not the first date, not the first kiss. A smaller moment, a sentence he said in passing, a look that lasted half a second too long, a silence on the phone that felt louder than words. And in that moment, something in you sat up. Something old. Something that had been sleeping for a long time, waiting. You didn't choose that reaction. You couldn't have. And that's exactly the part nobody tells you about destiny. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It simply announces itself, quietly, in your body, before your mind has caught up to what's happening. If you've ever felt that, stay with me for the next few minutes, because I'm going to tell you the one thing that happens, without exception, every single time two people are truly meant for each other. It is not romantic, it is not comfortable. Most people miss it completely because they're taught to look for the wrong signs. But once you understand it, you will never misread a connection again. You will finally know the difference between a man who is part of your becoming and a man who is simply part of your undoing. Let's start with what destiny is not. Destiny is not ease. It is not a man who says all the right things at all the right times. It is not butterflies that never turn into questions. Somewhere along the way, we were sold a story. That if something is meant to be, it should feel effortless, safe, obvious from day one. That story is comforting. It is also almost entirely false. Here is the one thing that always happens when two people are destined for each other. One of them becomes a mirror the other cannot look away from, and it terrifies them both. Not because the mirror shows something ugly, but because it shows something true. It shows the parts of themselves they've spent years managing, hiding, performing around, the wound they never named, the fear they never admitted, even to their closest friend, the way they've quietly been abandoning themselves in every relationship that came before this one. A destined connection does not soothe your ego, it interrupts it. Think about the people who have simply been comfortable, easy to be around, pleasant, familiar. You could sit with them for hours and feel nothing shift inside you. Now think about the one who unsettled you, the one whose name still does something to your chest, even now, even after everything. That unsettling wasn't a red flag. It was a signal. Your nervous system was responding to recognition, not to danger, though for a long time, those two things can feel identical, especially if you've been hurt before. This is where I want you to really listen, because this next part explains almost every confusing relationship you've ever had. Your body cannot always tell the difference between someone who is going to heal you and someone who is going to wound you the same way you were wounded before. Both create the exact same physical sensation, a tightening low in your stomach, a mind that won't stop circling back to them, a feeling of being unusually alive in their presence. This is why so many women chase the wrong men for years, convinced it's destiny, when really it's just an old wound finding a new face to wear. And it's also why some women walk away from the right man, because his steadiness didn't spike their nervous system the way chaos used to. So how do you tell them apart? Here's the difference. Pay close attention, because this is the part almost nobody explains correctly. A wound-repeating connection makes you feel more anxious the longer it continues. The intensity stays sharp, but your sense of self gets smaller. You start rehearsing conversations in your head. You start performing a version of yourself you think he'll want. You start shrinking your needs down to a size that won't inconvenience him. The chemistry never fades, but your peace does. A destined connection also creates intensity. This is the part people miss because they expect it to feel calm. It doesn't, not at first. But the intensity moves you toward yourself instead of away from yourself. Even while it's confusing, even while there's distance or mixed signals or timing that makes no sense, you notice something happening underneath the ache. You're becoming more honest, more aware of your patterns, more able to name what you actually want instead of settling for what's offered. That's the one thing that always happens. Destined connections do not just create longing for a person, they create pressure toward your own growth. They function like a hand pressing gently but firmly against the exact place in you that has been avoiding change. Let me tell you about a woman I'll call Mara, because her story is one that so many of you will recognize pieces of, even if the details are different. Mara met a man during a period of her life when everything felt like it was quietly falling apart. In that way, that doesn't announce itself with a single dramatic event, but shows up as exhaustion, as a low hum of dissatisfaction she couldn't quite name. She wasn't looking for anyone. If anything, she'd built a kind of fortress around herself after her last relationship, one where she gave and gave until there was nothing left of her to give, and he simply left when the giving stopped. This new man was different in a way she couldn't articulate, not because he said extraordinary things. He wasn't performing charm. In fact, in some ways, he was frustratingly ordinary, inconsistent with his texts, slow to open up, careful in a way that sometimes read as distant. Any dating advice she'd absorbed over the years would have told her to walk away. Inconsistency is supposed to be a red flag. Slowness is supposed to mean disinterest, but something kept her still. Not obsessed. Still. There's a difference. Obsession is loud. It demands. It replays and spirals and cannot rest. What Mara felt was quieter than that. A sense that whatever this was, it wasn't finished revealing itself yet. And so, instead of chasing him, or performing for him, or trying to manufacture certainty where there was none, she did something most people skip entirely. She turned inward. She started asking herself why his inconsistency bothered her so much more than it should have for someone she barely knew. She started noticing that her anxiety wasn't really about him. It was about an old, familiar fear that if she wasn't perfectly easy, perfectly low maintenance, perfectly undemanding, she would be left again. That fear didn't belong to this relationship. It belonged to every relationship she'd ever had, going back further than she wanted to admit, back to a home where love had always felt conditional on how well she behaved. This is the part of destiny nobody markets, because it isn't glamorous. It doesn't look like a love story. It looks like a woman sitting alone at 11 at night, finally being honest with herself about a pattern she's repeated her entire life. And here is what's strange. The man himself didn't have to do anything dramatic for this to happen. He simply existed in a way that exposed the pattern. That's the mirror. That's the mechanism. Destined people don't arrive to complete you like a missing puzzle piece. That metaphor, however popular, is actually a little dangerous because it implies you are incomplete without them. Destined people arrive to reveal you. What was already there. What you'd been too busy, too hurt, or too distracted to look at directly. If you're watching this and thinking of someone specific right now, I want you to notice something. Are you thinking about how good they made you feel? Or are you thinking about what you learned about yourself because of them? Because that answer tells you almost everything about whether this connection is doing what destined connections do. Now, I want to talk about something Carl Jung wrote about extensively, though rarely in the context people expect, the concept of the shadow. Your shadow is not evil. It is simply the collection of everything about yourself that you've pushed out of conscious awareness, because at some point, it wasn't safe or acceptable to show it. Your neediness, your anger, your fear of being ordinary, your fear of being too much, your fear of not being enough. All of it gets packed away into a part of you that you don't examine, because examining it is uncomfortable. Here's the unsettling truth about romantic attraction. We are often most magnetically drawn to people who carry, visibly, the exact traits we've buried in our own shadow. If you've spent your life being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never asks for too much, you may find yourself pulled toward a man who is free in a way you've never allowed yourself to be. Not because you want to be like him necessarily, but because some part of you recognizes what you gave up in order to become who you are. This is why the most intense attractions often make no logical sense on paper. He's not your type. He doesn't check your boxes. Friends don't understand it. And yet, something in you responds to him the way iron responds to a magnet, unable to explain the pull in words that satisfy anyone, including yourself. That pull is not always destiny in the sense of we will end up together. Sometimes it is destiny in the sense of you will end up different because of this. Those are not the same thing, and confusing them is where so much heartbreak comes from. I need you to hear this clearly. A connection can be profoundly meaningful, can genuinely alter the course of your life, can teach you something you needed to learn for the rest of your years, without ending in a relationship. This does not make it less real. It does not mean you misread it. It means you're measuring it by the wrong metric. We've been trained to believe that the only proof of a meaningful connection is permanence. But permanence and meaning are not the same currency. Think about it this way. Some teachers stay with you for a semester and change how you see the entire world. You don't measure their impact by how long they remained in your life. You measure it by what shifted in you because they were there. Destined connections can work the exact same way. And understanding this will save you years of heartbreak trying to force a temporary teacher into a permanent role. But, and this is important, some destined connections are meant to be permanent. Not all separation is the end of the story. Sometimes it's simply the middle. So how do you know which kind you're living through? Here is where the one true pattern becomes visible, if you know how to look for it. Watch what happens to both people during the difficulty, not just during the good moments. This is the test almost everyone fails, because we're so focused on the highs that we forget to study the response to the lows. If it's a connection built on illusion, the difficulty breaks something. One person disappears into avoidance, the other spirals into anxiety and starts performing, chasing, shape-shifting to try to earn back a version of intimacy that was never stable in the first place. The relationship, if you can call it that, becomes about managing each other's reactions instead of building anything real. There's no coming back from this cleanly, because the foundation was never solid. It was intensity mistaken for depth. If it's a connection with real destiny behind it, the difficulty does something else entirely. It doesn't disappear the tension. Sometimes it makes things harder for a while, even much harder. But somewhere underneath the pain, both people are quietly growing more honest. Not performing honesty, actually becoming more truthful, even if that truth is inconvenient. I'm scared. I don't know what I want yet. I handled that badly, and I'm sorry. These sentences are rare, and when they start appearing, even occasionally, even imperfectly, that's the mirror doing its work. That's two people being changed by each other in real time, whether or not they end up together in the end. This is the one thing that always happens, stated as simply as I can put it. Destined connections force both people to become more truthful, with themselves first and with each other second. Illusioned connections do the opposite. They reward performance and punish honesty, until both people are exhausted from playing roles neither of them actually chose. Let me bring Mara's story back in here, because what happened next matters. Months into knowing this man, Mara did something that felt, at the time, like the hardest thing she'd ever done. She told him the truth. Not a curated, palatable version of the truth designed to keep him close. The actual truth, that his inconsistency triggered an old fear in her, that she needed more clarity than he'd been giving, that she was tired of interpreting silence as either love or rejection because she genuinely couldn't tell the difference anymore. She expected him to disappear. Most of the men in her past had, the moment she asked for anything resembling emotional labor. Instead, something shifted. He got quiet. But it wasn't the avoidant quiet she recognized from before. It was the quiet of someone actually considering what she'd said, instead of planning his exit. And a few days later, he told her something he'd never said to anyone. That he pulled away from people right when things started to feel real, because the one time in his life he'd let someone fully in, it had ended in a way that convinced him closeness was a setup for loss. He wasn't inconsistent because he didn't care. He was inconsistent because caring terrified him more than almost anything else in his life. This is the moment I want you to really absorb, because it's the crux of everything I'm telling you today. That conversation did not happen because of chemistry. It did not happen because of attraction. It happened because both of them, independently, had done enough inner work to be capable of that level of honesty when the moment demanded it. If Mara had still been the woman who shrank herself to keep people close, she never would have said what she said. If he had still been fully unconscious of his own pattern, he never would have been able to answer her the way he did. Destiny didn't hand them a relationship. Destiny handed them each other at the exact moment they were both capable of finally telling the truth. That's the timing people talk about when they say things happen when you're ready. It's not mystical, it's psychological. You become capable of a different kind of love because you've done the work that makes that love possible to receive and to give. I want to be honest with you about something else because I think you deserve more than comfort. You deserve clarity. Not every version of this story ends the way Mara's did. Sometimes the mirror shows someone the truth, and instead of rising to meet it, they run from it permanently. Sometimes one person does the inner work and the other never does, and the relationship simply cannot survive that gap, no matter how much love exists inside it. This happens. It's painful, and it's real. And if it's happened to you, I'm not going to insult you by pretending it wasn't destiny just because it didn't end in a wedding. Here's what I want you to understand instead. Even in those cases, the ones that don't end in reunion, the ones that leave you with an ache that doesn't fully make sense to people who weren't there, the pattern still held. You still changed. You still became more aware, more honest, more capable of real intimacy than you were before that person walked into your life. The one thing that always happens, happened. The relationship's ending doesn't erase the transformation. It just means that transformation was the entire point, rather than a stepping stone towards something else. This reframes heartbreak in a way that might feel strange at first, but sit with it. What if the ache you still feel isn't proof that you lost something? What if it's proof that something real happened to you at all? Most connections in a lifetime don't leave a mark like that. Most people come and go without disturbing anything. The ones who leave a lasting mark are rare, specifically because they touched something real in you, your shadow, your wound, your unmet potential. And once something real has been touched, it doesn't just quietly go back to sleep. Now let's talk about something that I think explains why so many women stay confused for years, sometimes decades, about a connection that clearly meant something. We are taught, almost from childhood, to seek external validation as proof of love. If he calls, it means he cares. If he doesn't, it means he doesn't. If he commits quickly, it's real. If he takes his time, something's wrong. We've outsourced the entire measurement of love to someone else's behavior, as though our own inner experience holds no evidence at all. But here's what Jung understood and what modern psychology has only caught up to more recently. The most important relationship you will ever assess accurately is not the one with another person. It's the one with yourself. Your capacity to sit with uncertainty without abandoning your own peace. Your ability to know what you feel without needing him to confirm it before you're allowed to feel it. Your willingness to stay honest even when honesty doesn't get you the outcome you want. When you rely entirely on external signals, his texting frequency, his consistency, his declarations, you hand the entire experience of love over to someone else's nervous system, someone else's healing timeline, someone else's readiness. This is why so many women feel like they're on an emotional roller coaster they didn't consent to ride. They didn't consent to it. They just never learned there was another way to hold a connection, one where your peace isn't hostage to his next move. The women who navigate destined connections with the most grace are not the ones who get lucky with perfectly available, perfectly healed men from the very beginning. They're the ones who learn to stay rooted in their own truth, regardless of what the other person is doing. Not detached, not indifferent. Rooted. There's a difference between a woman who has shut her heart off to protect herself and a woman who keeps her heart open while keeping her feet firmly on her own ground. The second one is what real emotional maturity looks like, and it is exactly what makes someone capable of receiving a destined connection instead of destroying it out of fear. I want to give you something practical here because insight without application just becomes another thing you know, but don't use. The next time you feel that unmistakable pull towards someone, the one that unsettles you in that particular way, the one your friends can't quite explain either, do not immediately ask, "Does he like me?" Ask something more useful. Ask, "What is this person showing me about myself that I haven't wanted to look at?" Ask, "Am I becoming more honest around this person, or am I becoming more like a performance?" Ask, when the intensity fades for a moment, "Am I still curious about who I'm becoming, or was it only ever about him?" These questions will tell you more about the nature of the connection than any text message timing analysis ever could. They will tell you whether you're standing in front of a mirror or standing in front of a trap dressed up to look like one. And if the answers are uncomfortable, if you realize you've been shrinking, performing, abandoning your own needs to keep someone close, that discomfort is not a sign that the connection was fake. It's a sign that the work has already started, whether or not this particular story ends in the way you originally hoped. There's one more thing I need to tell you, and it might be the most important part of everything I've said so far. The one thing that always happens when two people are truly destined isn't something that happens to you, it's something you participate in creating, whether you realize it or not. Destiny is not a fixed script written somewhere outside of you, waiting to be discovered. It's closer to a doorway that opens because of who you've become and who they've become, independently, before you ever arrived in front of it together. If you stay unconscious, if you keep repeating the same patterns, keep mistaking chaos for chemistry, keep performing instead of showing up honestly, you can walk right past that doorway without ever noticing it was there. Not because it wasn't real, but because you weren't ready to see it. This is not meant to frighten you. It's meant to hand you back the power you may have felt you didn't have. You are not a passive character waiting for fate to deliver a man to your doorstep, fully healed, perfectly timed, ready to love you exactly the way you deserve. You are an active participant in your own becoming. Every honest conversation you have with yourself, every pattern you interrupt, every old fear you name instead of act out, all of it is quietly shaping whether you'll recognize the doorway when it appears and whether you'll be someone capable of walking through it instead of sabotaging it out of fear. So, if you're in the middle of a connection right now that confuses you, one that feels too intense to be nothing but too uncertain to feel safe, stop asking whether he's the one. Start asking who you're becoming in his presence. Watch what happens to your honesty under pressure. Watch what happens to his. That's the pattern. That's the one thing that always happens, every single time. Whether the story ends in forever or ends in a lesson you needed exactly as much. And if you're not currently in that kind of connection, if you're the one who's been left wondering why someone from your past still crosses your mind at strange hours, still shows up in dreams you can't fully explain, understand this. If that connection changed you, if it made you more honest, more aware, more capable of real intimacy than you were before, it already did what it came to do. Whether or not they ever return, you are not the same person they met. That, more than any reunion, more than any grand romantic ending, is the actual proof that something real passed between you. You don't need them to come back to know it mattered. You already carry the proof, quietly, in the way you love now, in the standards you no longer apologize for, in the honesty you no longer hide behind performance. That transformation is not a consolation prize. It's the entire point. It always was. If this helped you make sense of something you've been carrying for a while, sit with it for a moment before you scroll away. And if you want more of this, the kind of understanding that doesn't just comfort you, but actually changes how you see love, stay close. There's more to uncover, and I think you're ready for it.